Shabbat Shalom. In the 2 weeks since I submitted a few words to the J Weekly of Northern California, 4 hostages have been released from Gaza. Nurit Cooper, Yocheved Lifshitz, Judith Ra'anan, and Natalie Ra'anan. 4 precious souls, 4 women, 2 elderly grandmas, a mom not much older than me, and her beautiful daughter. 4. And for that we are bidden to be grateful. Mrs. Lifshitz described her treatment in captivity as quite humane. This little grandma in a housecoat, as she was being returned to her family over the Israel-Gaza border, turned back to the captives, these brutal kidnappers, and she said, Shalom. Shalom. Giving us a sliver of an iota of a glimmer of hope that maybe particularly the most vulnerable are being treated with some measure of humanity. And so today we are still clinging to that hope. In these days of unimaginable grief and existential terror for the state and land of Israel, I myself need the Torah more than ever. Clinging to it like a life raft in a churning sea. Clinging to it, to my Jewish family, and to all good people who want a better world for all of our children and our grandmas. I continue to offer inexpressible thanks for the lessons provided by our sacred history and for those who continue to make space for it. In our vast and sprawling Torah portion of Lech Lecha, Abram and Sarai, 2 seemingly ordinary people, receive the divine call to go forth. They go with a large retinue, including Abram's nephew Lot, first into Canaan, then to Egypt, and back into the Negev. There, Abram and Lot go their separate ways when their abundant cattle need more land on which to graze. And because, quote, there was quarreling between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and those of Lot's cattle. Nothing new under the sun, in Genesis 13:7. The mention of the strife between the ranchers isn't elaborated upon, but it foreshadows the next chapter where we began our reading today, the War of the 9 Kings. Abram had pitched his tent and built an altar to God in Hebron. It was a picture of domestic and religious calm. But when word reaches him that his nephew Lot has been swept up in the hostilities and taken hostage, Abram the Hebrew, as he's called in 14, verse 13, becomes Abram the battle commander. I can imagine it was not a role he relished, but one to which he was compelled. Genesis 14, verses 14 through 16. Hearing that his kinsmen had been taken captive, Abram mustered his retainers born into his household, 318 of them, going in pursuit as far as Dan. At night he deployed himself and his forces against them and defeated them, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. He then brought back all the possessions, his nephew Lot too, and his possessions. He restored the women too, and the other people. As a side note, 318 is an odd number. We think it may have been one of the conventional numbers used for groups. Seems to have something to do maybe with the number 7. If you are into interesting number facts or number trivia, the prime numbers between 7 and 49, 7 times 7, when added together, total 318, if you like. Number is found in a description of the retinue of a Mitanni princess, so it is a rare number, but also seems to crop up in odd places. And it's further been noted, for people who like such things, that in the Iliad, the number of men killed is numbered at 318. Another opinion was that the figure was one of actual ancient memory. It's quoted in ancient sources, "To this very day there are old men in the tents of Arabia who can recite the history of their ancestors for 40 generations, and if in their recital they stray but a jot from the facts, others within hearing will immediately correct them or supply forgotten details." So in that telling, many will insist, or did insist in another time, that 318 was exact. But one interpretation that I like as well is that Abraham's most trusted servant, Eliezer, who is the one that he says to God, "I have no one to inherit but my servant, the Damascene from Damascus." Eliezer, also, if you like numbers, the numerical value of Eliezer, using the Hebrew equivalent for numbers, is, I'm going to let you guess, 318. So there's a thought that, if you want to read in a little bit differently, Abraham went with only his sidekick, his most trusted servant, Eliezer, and the two of them were able to extract Lot and all of the possessions and the people and the women too. Whatever the number 318 means, the image of Abram springing from his place of comfort to rescue his nephew in straits has the sense of a swashbuckling fairy tale. The action is swift, decisive, and utterly successful. Though it rarely works that way in actuality, for more than 30 centuries, Jews have looked to this portion, to Abram's courage, as the basis for the Jewish value of Pidyon Shavuim. Pidyon Shavuim, the redemption of the captives. When I wrote the piece, there were approximately, by estimates, 164 Israeli Jews held hostage in Gaza. Now we know the number to be much closer to 200. And the Jewish people and the Jewish state sit in gut-wrenching turmoil. How can we reunite our kinsmen with their families? Is it even possible? Is the risk of trying too great? Is the risk of not trying even greater? And at what physical, psychological, and less importantly, but important, financial cost? We have faced hostage situations before, far too many to even begin to count, but just a couple, and some of you will be quite familiar with a number of these stories because, well, many of us lived through a lot of this. From an American standpoint, you may remember that in 1993, American pilot Michael Durant was captured by General Mohammed Farah Adid's men in Mogadishu, Somalia. This is the incident that led to was called the Black Hawk Down incident. And former U.S. Ambassador Robert Oakley had sent the following message to Adid. It's hard to hear. He said, "I guarantee you we are not going to pay or trade for him in any way, shape, or form. So what we'll decide is that we have to rescue him. And whether we have the right place or the wrong place, there's going to be a fight with your people. The minute the guns start again, all restraint on the United States side will go. Just look at the stuff coming in here now, an aircraft carrier, tanks, gunships, the works. Once the fighting starts, all this pent-up anger is going to be released. This whole part of the city will be destroyed. Men, women, children, camels, cats, dogs, goats, donkeys, everything. That would really be tragic for everyone. And Michael Durant was released unconditionally the next day. This has been the Israeli position as well. It certainly hoped to be, to some extent, I suppose. A strong precedent was set in the Dawson's Field hijacking of September 1970. 5 airliners were hijacked by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Jewish passengers were held hostage in Jordan, and the release conditioned on the release of all our political prisoners jailed in Israel. The Israelis refused to negotiate. Jordan's King Hussein, incensed by the audacity of the autonomous use of Jordan's territory, declared martial law, and he set to work crushing PLO forces in Jordan. A swift Jordanian victory enabled the September 30th deal, where the hostages were released. Unfortunately, another case, of course, was the Munich massacre of 1972, in which members of the Israeli Olympic team were taken hostage by Black September, a Palestinian group. Their demand was the release and safe passage to Egypt of 234 Palestinians and non-Arabs jailed in Israel. Israel's response was that there would be no negotiation. In that instance, the position of no negotiations with terrorists, which is accepted and maintained by the United States and many other democracies, was maintained, even at the cost of the eventual murder of all of the hostages by the terrorists. One of the greatest moments of heroism for the Jewish people in recent history was Operation Entebbe, the summer of 1976. In that instance, terrorists demanded the release of 40 Palestinians held in Israel and 13 other detainees imprisoned in Kenya, France, Switzerland, and West Germany. They threatened that if these demands were not met, they would begin to kill hostages within days. Special forces from the Israel Defense Forces flew over 2,500 miles to Uganda under the cover of night for a rescue operation which took a week of planning, lasted 90 minutes, and rescued 102 hostages. That's the one that sounds the most like Abraham and his 318, or maybe his one, friend going in to rescue Lot. The Israelis did not succumb to the terrorist demands, though it cost the life of Yonatan Netanyahu and a few of the hostages killed in the crossfire. But that raid, the raid on Entebbe, inspired generations of soldiers to a kind of heroism and self-sacrifice, and instilled fear in the hearts of Israel's enemies. But since then, Israel has made large-scale prisoner exchanges in order to secure the return of even a small number of captive soldiers. That's been going on since the 1950s. This is a terrible dilemma, my friends. It's mind-blowing and heart-squeezing. 11 years ago this month, Gilad Shalit was reunited with his family after 5 years and 4 months captivity in Gaza. The release of this one soldier was brokered with Hamas in exchange for 1,027 prisoners held in Israel. And at other times, live detainees have been freed just to have bones returned to Israel for proper burial. Jews have wrestled with inordinately high ransoms placed on captive kin all throughout our history. It was so common that Jewish communities regularly maintained funds for redeeming captives of wars, pirates, gold-hungry emperors, feudal landlords, and tax collectors. And I want to say a special thank you to Rabbi Baruch Davidson, a wonderful piece a few years ago called "Is Prisoner Exchange a Jewish Value?" Really recommend it to you to read. The debate over how much or whether to pay ruthless kidnappers is a very old one. The rabbis of the Talmud assert with ongoing attempts to clarify what they mean by the principles that they lay out, because it's so complicated, it sticks in the mouth. They assert that redeeming captives must not be done if the price would be ruinous to the community or if it would simply encourage similar heinous acts. But those two things are nearly impossible to determine at times. But in the Middle Ages, Maimonides forcefully declared, the redeeming of captives takes precedence even over the feeding and clothing of the poor. For not only is the captive included in the generality of the hungry, the thirsty, and the naked, but his very life is in jeopardy. He who turns his eyes away from redeeming him transgresses the commandments, you shall not harden your heart nor shut your hand, in Deuteronomy 15. Neither shall you stand idly by the blood of your neighbor, in Leviticus 19. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, also in Leviticus 19, and so many similar admonitions. In summary, says Rambam, Maimonides, there is no religious duty greater than the redeeming of captives. We have tried to hold by the principle of not negotiating with terrorists, and the imbalances of the so-called prisoner exchange deals leave me speechless again and again. But what makes this all the more awful, especially right now, is that Lech Lecha, this portion, is the one that reminds us unequivocally that Jews and Muslims have the same father, Abraham. Abraham pleads for Ishmael, his firstborn. He pleads with God that Ishmael would find favor with God, and God says he will. He will be the father of a great nation. I will have a special relationship, a different relationship with Isaac. It is the language of the covenant and the Jewish people. But the Torah does not erase Ishmael. In fact, Hagar and Ishmael have some of the most extraordinary vision prophecies in all of the Bible. We cherish those words as much as any of the others because they are written and maintained and read and explored again and again and again to remind us that we're one family. And that's what makes this so much worse. It's the worst kind of warfare. The clash of kin who actually know and share a common ancestry, and it is the furthest thing from a fairy tale. But I am grateful beyond expression to be a part of a people that values life and our children over everything. And I promise you, my friends, that I will do everything within my power and my ability to pray and to work and to fight and to hope that there may yet come a day when the children of Isaac and the children of Ishmael can live together in peace. May those held in captivity be restored to their heartbroken families. May they be sheltered under the wings of the Shekhinah. And may our beautiful homeland know soon the blessing given by Yocheved Lifshitz as she was returned to her family, the blessing of Shalom. Ken Yehi Ratzon.